feel creeped out?
Okay. Alright, it's recording.
Staring. We're going to talk about staring. So when I was in Korea, there was a lot of staring. So in some of the themes in the book, we were talking about this, how I'm just kind of doing little things in society, and I just have people staring at me. Or I'm trying to read a book on the bus, and people are staring at my book as I'm reading it. And and I remember getting very irritated quite a bit with that in Korea, and I didn't know how to handle it quite often. And I think in one of the scenes, I'm walking down the street and I just have somebody staring at me, and I walk all the way around him, and I come back to the same spot again. And this person basically just follows me.
Does a 360, right?
Yep, and he doesn't even fade, like he doesn't even...
Not phased.
And then I just kind of go like this, and then what happens is they look at me more because I have blue eyes. So they look at me and they kind of like, oh, not only is he interesting, but he also has blue eyes. And I can't do anything. Like in the West, we would, if I look back at somebody, they look away. But in Korean society, that was completely acceptable to stare at anything or anybody. And one of the things that was interesting there was, for a while, that used to really irritate me. It bothered almost every single foreigner. All of them would have that adjustment issue. But then in time, I started to realize that they do that to each other. So I noticed that if I walk out in the street and there's somebody doing some work, crowds of Koreans will stand around and just stare at them doing their work. So the fact that I'm walking by and people are staring at me isn't really that different than anything else they would look at.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't a problem.
Because they did it to each other.
They did it to each other.
Yeah, so they didn't realize that them doing it to you was, in our culture, an act of aggression.
That's right.
It's an act of aggression.
Yeah.
I had the same experiences in Japan in the 80s, where not only would I be stared at, typically on public transport, where people were sitting down or, in a court, in a crowded space, they would just stare, and it bugged the hell out of me. And I would learn to, make gestures, like look away.
Yep.
And sometimes they, would, look the other direction. Or sometimes I got to a point where I could understand what they were talking about if they were, with a friend and staring at me. And I would reply, that's very rude. You shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Or this is not a zoo, and I'm not an animal. Or sometimes we would just play games with each other. If I was with a friend and they would get stared at, we'd pretend to be monkeys, and we would groom each other, So I would stand up and I would groom my friend's head, and just to cope.
Yeah, and it's interesting because now it's I think both of us have been living in Asia for quite a while, 20 years, a little bit longer, and I think it's changed so much. Like now we just don't really have those issues at all. Like
Not at all.
I don't know if people can really relate to those same experiences anymore.
No, I don't. I have not experienced any of those things. I've been back to Japan to visit, and foreigners are just not an issue anymore.
Same with me. And when I was living there, I made the transition from Korea, and it just, I never got stared at. I never had the issue. But I did meet one woman. This was about 5 years ago, and she was a young woman, about 23, 24, American woman. And she was like, I'm getting stared at all the time here up in Niigata, where I was living.
Really?
And I was really surprised. I was thinking, well, that's not happening to me. And I even had kids up there, and I would think I should get stared at more than anybody.
Was she blonde?
She was. She was young and blonde, so she...
Yeah, blondes are... There's this Hollywood stereotypical image that many Asian men have about blondes.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
I'm sure